Next up, we have Indivisible Rhode Island's political advisor and our favorite geophysicist, Sam Bell.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out here. This is why we are going to win, because people like you are coming out day after day. We're not giving up the fight, and we are not going to give up the fight. Today, I want to talk about a difficult topic. It's an uncomfortable topic, one we often don't like to talk about, but one that is very important, particularly when we talk about the truth. And I want to talk about the media here in Rhode Island. It's something a lot of people aren't focusing on, and I think often flies under the radar. You may have heard in the special election in Montana when the Republican body slammed a reporter. There was a TV station in Montana that refused to air the news story because the reporter was supposedly a liberal reporter, so it didn't matter. And that news station was owned by a corporation named Sinclair Media, which is a right-wing corporation that has been buying up local TV stations all across our country. During the election, they pushed out news pieces that were aired at all their local stations that were little more than propaganda. One of them memorably said people shouldn't vote for Democrats because in the 19th century, Democrats supported slavery. And Sinclair Media just bought Channel 10, which is Rhode Island's largest media source. And we need to understand the threat that the corporate control of the Rhode Island media poses, and in particular, the fact that a lot of these corporations really are conservative corporations, and that does affect our media, it does affect our politics. We need to understand this, we need to talk about it, and we need to think about it. Sinclair has not implemented that many changes yet at Channel 10, but they are probably coming, and we have to be vigilant, and we have to watch, and we have to make sure that we maintain our state's largest TV station as a real news channel. Channel 12 is owned by a corporation whose CEO is a reliable Republican donor who's given more than 5 times as much to Republican congressional candidates as Democratic candidates. It's not, you know, some sort of fake news channel, but it is owned by a corporation that's pretty conservative. But the scariest news channel in Rhode Island, I think, is Channel 6. Because Channel 6 doesn't have a political reporter. Channel 6 has reporters who occasionally do political stories, but it mostly focuses on things like sex offenders and house fires and stabbings. And in some ways, that's the scariest part of what's happening to our news media, that we might at some point lose the news. And if we don't have people who are watching our politicians, who are watching what's happened, if we don't have facts, if we don't have truth in our politics, what could happen is scarier than I think we need to contemplate right now. I think we should also talk a little bit about the newspapers in this state. Some of you might have heard of Sheldon Adelson, the Republican billionaire who spent $100 million on Mitt Romney, who fortunately lost. Unfortunately, that didn't happen this time around. But Sheldon Adelson is a casino mogul in Las Vegas who owns the Venetian Casino. And he was involved in some sketchy business practices, and he didn't like the fact that the local newspaper in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, was publishing stories that were critical of him. So he bought it. And the corporation that owns the Las Vegas Review-Journal, GateHouse Media, is allowing him to own the paper and is operating it for him. And that is the corporation that bought the Projo a year or two ago. And the Projo used to be owned by a Texas company, and since it was owned by that Texas company, its coverage got steadily more and more conservative. And now it's owned by an even more conservative corporation. This is happening also down in the local papers. A lot of the local papers in Rhode Island are owned by people who are avowed Republicans and avowed conservatives. There was a brief moment in South County when someone wanted to start a paper that was, quote, independent of corporate interests, called the South County Independent, but it is no longer independent and is now run by the Newport Daily News. And when we look at a lot of our media sources in Rhode Island, I think one of the scariest things is where we've lost coverage. It's not just where we have conservative bias. I'd rather have a conservative paper that does real news coverage. But if you look at how a lot of stories are often covered, I think one of the examples is if you look at, there are many papers I could pick on, but I'm just going to pick on one of them, which is the East Greenwich Pendulum, which is owned by Rhode Island Central. And I want to read their top stories. There's the Nook Coffee House, a quaint, cozy spot on Main Street. Safety Town returns. EGLL continues for 65th year. Meadowbrook student learn about Lyme. EG wraps up difficult transition with positive attitude. And nowhere in those stories is what's happening politically in East Greenwich, where the Republicans have taken over the town and are trying to decimate the schools. You wouldn't read about that in the local paper because the coverage is not about the politics. And that's scary. That's in some ways, I think, the scariest thing that could happen to our media. So we have to watch as reporters at the Projo are told to, instead of covering news, spend some of their time writing up stories about stabbings, which is happening more and more and more. We have to notice when they kick the political reporters out of the State House and bounce them out to other beats and then replace them and turn them as soon as they start producing good news coverage. We have to be vigilant because the corporations that have bought up Rhode Island's media, a lot of them are scary corporations, and the Projo and Channel 10 are protected because they have unions, and that has slowed down some of the changes, but we're going to have to stay vigilant because these changes are coming, and we have to watch for them. I think we also have to think a little bit about bias. I know this is a really difficult topic to talk about. People don't like to think about it, but it's true. In Rhode Island, at Channel 10, at Channel 12, at Channel 6, at the Providence Journal, at all of these local papers, there is no liberal pundit. Certainly not on WPRO. We have tons and tons of conservative voices in the media, but no one is paid to be a liberal voice in Rhode Island's media. And that creates a problem. We don't have an MSNBC. We don't even have something like CNN that puts up voices from both sides and has a debate. That used to happen at Channel 10, but it isn't happening anymore. And I think we need to talk about that. When we don't have voices, when we can't hear from both sides, we lose something in our politics. We lose something in our debate, and we need to think about that. We need to watch it, and we need to be vigilant. And finally, I want to close with what I think is the scariest interaction I've ever had with the Rhode Island media. This was at Channel 6, where they just started a political show run by Joe Paolino, the former conservative Democratic mayor of Providence. And he very politely, very kindly invited me on his show. And this was right after the unfortunate events in November. And I was making the case that Trump was deeply scary. And I, in fact, did call Steve Bannon a racist. And the producers at Channel 6 didn't want to air that segment. And they said that we can't have this conversation. And so in the next segment I went and I very purposefully called him a racist again, and they put that up there. But what scared me is that here's a TV station in Rhode Island that's afraid to tell the truth about the Trump administration. That's not something we can stand for in our politics. That's not something we can allow to go on. And we really do have to be vigilant. We have to make sure that our media in this state does report the truth. And that means we have to be willing to call them out when they don't. We have to stand up for a free, independent media that's funded to do actual journalism. So thank you so much for coming out. I know this is a tough conversation to talk about. For members of the media who are here, I want to thank you for listening to this. And I also want to thank absolutely everyone who has come out today because we're going to have a lot of work to do. We're going to do this. We are going to take our country back, and it's because of all of you. I just wanted to say I missed the most important part of my speech, which is to talk about Rhode Island Future, which is an independent news source that really does cover the news that other news sources won't. They're here chronicling this rally. They're at every single media event. that the rest of the media won't cover, and we need to support their journalism, because without true, honest, hardworking journalism that's willing to tell the truth, we will have no future.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Thank you.